channel to update the latest information. We are QTN. Putin's recent actions have caused quite a stir. The Russian Navy was deployed to the Baltic Sea, which took Norway and Denmark by surprise. Denmark, in response, fired upon the Russian Navy with their warplanes. With both countries now actively engaged in the conflict, the balance of power has shifted once again. Putin's risky move has earned him two new enemies, and his reputation has taken a hit. Tensions in the Baltic Sea remain high, and Denmark's aggressive response has shocked the world. The Russian army's morale has taken a major hit, and it has lost the fighting spirit it displayed at the beginning of the conflict with Ukraine. As the war rages on, almost all countries have some level of involvement, and the balance of power has shifted. Russia finds itself increasingly isolated, with Ukraine receiving political and military support. Russia's senseless moves and policy of isolation have made victory seem impossible for its army. It has been forced out of many regions, leaving it unsure of its next move. The Russian army is in a difficult position as it tries to both maintain the territories it captured at the start of the war and regroup for a counterattack. With its power waning, Russia is eager to retreat and rebuild its forces. The Russian army sees capturing the city of Bakhmut as a key to advancing and potentially ending the war if they can also take the capital, Kyiv. However, the army is now at risk of being pushed out of Ukraine completely, as it lacks the strength to hold on to its gains. The Russian army is struggling to both defend the territories it has captured and to launch new attacks. If it fails to capture more part in a short period of time, it may face further challenges in maintaining control over what it already holds. Reports suggest that Russia's next target for attack is the Baltic Sea, with the aim of intensifying invasions of the Baltic countries if it emerges victorious from the conflict with Ukraine. In response, the Baltic countries have taken measures to protect themselves from a potential Russian invasion. The Baltic countries have signed a mutual support agreement and are now actively advocating for Ukraine's support in the international community. They are offering assistance to Ukraine in every possible way and are taking steps to prevent a potential invasion of Ukraine. These countries fear that if Ukraine falls, they could be next in line, and therefore view Ukraine's liberation as key to their own freedom. Upon learning of this, Russia attempted to intimidate these countries by deploying its navy to the Baltic Sea. Despite leader Vladimir Putin's attempt to intimidate the Baltic countries and prevent any hostile attempts against Russia, the opposite reaction was received. Norway and Denmark, who were the most vocal in the region, refused to remain silent and took a counteraction against Russia. Despite the urging of the Russian army to retreat from the area, they instead moved closer to the borders of Denmark and Norway. In response, the countries formulated an operational plan to neutralize the Russian threat. They are determined not to succumb to this grave threat and are working towards a solution to protect themselves from Russian aggression. In order to prevent the Russian Navy from posing a real threat, Norway and Denmark took action by identifying the route of their ships and thwarting their attempts. They used drones to detect the vessel and determine the route Russia would follow. The countries then organized an unexpected operation that caught Russia off guard. Although F-16 fighter jets were sent to intercept the Russian army, they did not stop their advance. The Russian Navy did not take the threat from Norway and Denmark seriously, and this turned out to be a big mistake. Despite warnings to the Russian army, which had officially entered Danish borders, they seemed to have no effect. As a result, the Danish army decided to take action and attack the Russian Navy to force them to stop. Powerful weapons were used in the firing around the ships, causing panic among the Russian fleet. They realized the seriousness of the situation and attempted to leave Danish borders. The Danish army continued to pursue the Russian Navy until they had entirely left the wall, proving their determination to protect their country. Following these events, the Danish Prime Minister made a statement to the whole world, expressing that Vladimir Putin's actions will never be tolerated. The Prime Minister stated that Putin's actions pose a threat to the world as a whole and that Denmark is prepared to defend against any element that threatens their country. The Russian Navy's failure to leave the area after being fired upon could have had disastrous consequences. Although the Russian Navy's humiliation by Denmark has angered Putin, Russia does not have the power to fight another conflict. As Russia continues its conflict in Ukraine, it is unlikely to attack another country unless it secures a victory in Ukraine. The heavy reaction from the Baltic states, despite Russia's threats, is indicative of their determination to protect themselves against Russian aggression. Additionally, the fact that Norway and Denmark are NATO members further complicates Russia's relationship with these countries. Knowing that an attack on any NATO member would result in a united response, Russia must consider the implications of its actions and take a step back. With the mutual support agreement in place among the Baltic countries, it appears that Russia is headed towards a significant defeat. The Baltic countries are taking the issue seriously and are making every effort to prepare for a potential war, much like Ukraine. They have made significant decisions, such as renewing their defense systems and strengthening their armies. Additionally, they are working together to address any gaps in their defense capabilities. The Danish Prime Minister has emphasized that an attack on one Baltic state would be considered an attack on all of them. As the Baltic states provide significant aid to Ukraine, Putin is trying to prevent their involvement. Despite his attempts to block the support, the world recognizes that Putin's policies and actions are the biggest hindrance to Russia's victory. According to war analysts, it is no longer feasible for Russia to achieve success in Ukraine. At this point, Russia cannot take any initiatives to turn the tide of the conflict. It seems that Putin's efforts to prevent the Baltic states' aid to Ukraine have been unsuccessful, and the heroic efforts of Ukraine have contributed to their success in preventing Russia's victory. Russia's actions continue to pose a stealthy threat to European countries. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has significantly weakened Russia, and it is expected to face devastating consequences at the end of the war. Despite suffering numerous defeats, Putin remains steadfast in his belief that Russia can win the war. However, his disregard for the welfare of people and soldiers in distress has caused a growing avalanche of reactions against him. Meanwhile, Ukraine has achieved incredible feats in the face of Russian aggression, gaining international support and admiration for their bravery and resilience. Ukraine's success in foreign policy has strengthened its close relationships in the war zones. They have made clever political moves to ensure their victory on all fronts. Meanwhile, Putin is bearing a growing grudge due to the losses Russia has suffered in the conflict. Despite making unreasonable threats to every country involved in the war, Putin has failed to realize any of these threats. His anger and failed tactics have caused him to fall out of favor, but he remains stubbornly unyielding. The involvement of these two new countries in the war has left Russia with no choice but to withdraw. The effects of this retreat have already begun to manifest, and Russia is expected to experience a significant economic collapse at the end of the conflict. Dealing with difficult-to-close budget deficits, Russia is being further destabilized by its daily heavy defeats. In recent days, many crucial Russian headquarters in Batman were destroyed, causing further damage and instability. The Russian army has suffered irreversible damage, and it is the consensus among analysts that it will not last much longer with such significant losses.